Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the September 17th edition, shall we say, of the McCormick Theological Seminary Trauma Symposium. I am Reverend Dr. Stephanie M. Crumpton. I am one of the co-facilitators for the Trauma Symposium, and I am here with my co-facilitator.
Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dr. Barbara Wilson, Presbytery staff for the Presbytery of Chicago. Welcome. We are glad you are with us today.
This afternoon, we are continuing our focus, excuse me, on what it means to do care and support and sustainability in movement work. Many of you all are rejoining us, and we're always glad to see you again. Last week, we started just kind of generally talking about what does it mean to do care and movement work, but now we're moving towards the notion of sustainability in movement work. We have an amazing panel, group of panelists who are rejoining us again today. I'll briefly introduce you to each one of them. By the way, the information on today's discussion is listed there in the chat, so feel free to notice that for the agenda. Our first speaker is, again, the Reverend Dr. Theresa Smallwood. She's the Public Theology and Racial Justice Collaborative, the director of the Public Theology and Racial Justice Collaborative at Vanderbilt University. She is also joined by Reverend Vahisha Hassan, the Executive Director of Movement in Faith. And also we have Reverend Barbara Gorski, pastor of Elk Grove Presbyterian Church. We are so grateful that they are here with us. We're excited about following up on the pieces that they began with us. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way and move over to Reverend Dr. Theresa Smallwood.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm so delighted to be back with you. I enjoyed our lively discussion on 2 weeks ago, I believe. And I want to just share a few thoughts today. My question, the one posed to me, really caused me to go deep and to go inward. Because when we think about movement work, I'm just reminded of the fact that it's not just adults engaged. And one of my favorite songs done by Yolanda Adams, though many performers have performed it, is the song, "What About the Children?" And I want to sort of couch my comments and thoughts around this notion that in the movement, we have indeed a need to ask the question, what about the children? So I'm focused a little bit on the question, what are ACEs? What are ACEs? And I want to frame my thoughts around two recent incidences that should take us, inward individually and collectively, and maybe help us to think about trauma in movement spaces, and then what it is that we need to be asking around our children and their experience of these things. And I particularly want to say, as a sort of footnote or proviso, that it is not my intention to show images of children to exploit or in any fashion take advantage of their stories, but simply to illustrate for us the importance and the consciousness raising that we need to have in order to really respond in a fashion that allows us to evolve from situations in ways that really feed to our wholeness and ourselves. So I start with Jacob Blake, his 3 children pictured here with him, and I'm assuming a friend, it could be a cousin, someone else with them. But Jacob Blake, who we heard about in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And the picture of Jacob here is captured from a video, a screenshot of the video where the police officers are basically hunting him down like he's prey. And here he is, Jacob Blake, a Black man shot 7 times in the back by white police officer in front of his children. Let's let that sit with us for a minute, and then recognize, as a psychiatrist explains, how Jacob Blake's three sons seeing the police shoot their father how that could affect them for years to come. The reflection says 3 young children between the ages of 3 and 8 witnessed a Wisconsin police officer shoot their father multiple times in the back on Sunday. A child psychiatrist expert told Insider, which is where I draw this information from, that the trauma Jacob Blake's sons are experiencing is likely worsened by the fact that the violence they witnessed was against the parent and was perpetrated by figures of authority. Children are taught from a young age to trust their parents to provide comfort and safety, and to trust police officers to protect them. So breaking that trust can be particularly harmful to children enduring that kind of trauma. And so what this does is it makes it hard for kids to feel safe. Dr. Sarah Vinson of the Morehouse School of Medicine is quoted here as having told to Insider. So what are adverse childhood experiences? Well, the data suggests it's the traumatic experiences occurring before age 18. It includes all types of abuse and neglect. And I put in police brutality, though the study in the 80s did not really include that as a chip. But as well as police brutality, parental mental illness, substance use, divorce, incarceration, and domestic violence. The science would suggest that there's a correlation between the number of ACEs a person experiences and the variety of negative outcomes in adulthood, including poor physical and mental health, substance abuse, and risky behaviors. And the science has developed what they show here as a pyramid, that adverse childhood experiences can lead to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, which can lead to the adoption of health risk behaviors, which can lead to disease and disability and social problems, which can lead to early death. And of course, they make some kind of recommendations around the scientific gaps that happen in between these pyramidal increments. Another case involving Gianna Taylor and her mother, Roxy Washington, would obviously be the death of George Floyd. And the question becomes, is the loss of her father an adverse childhood experience? I mean, children lose their parents in early ages, and is that in and of itself an adverse childhood experience? And then the question for us today is, can the community play a role in helping her? Because we understand from the science that there are bodily manifestations of ACEs. Diseases and early mortality suggest that chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, ischemic heart disease, or IHD, liver disease, sexually transmitted diseases, lung cancer, or death before the age of 65 can all be bodily manifestations of having experienced adverse childhood experiences. And of course, the potential impact of these ACEs, those health issues that are socioeconomic to some degree, sociocultural, and most definitely have to do with the ways in which people live in light of the impacts: alcoholism and alcohol abuse, smoking, illicit drug use and IV drug abuse, obesity, suicide attempts, depression, anxiety, hallucinations, teen and unintended pregnancies, spontaneous abortion or fetal death, intimate partner violence, poor quality of life, and so on. And the question that we raise is about how the adversity and the resilience have some kind of path. Is there a path between the adversity that a child experiences or the adversities and a capacity for resilience that avoids these factors? Now, I need to hasten to say that some children thrive despite ACEs, and children may have their own characteristics and experiences that protect them and help them develop resilience despite their exposure to ACEs. But resilience must be focused upon because that is the positive adaptation within the context of significant adversity. And because resilience can play this role, neither resilience nor disease is particularly a certain outcome. But resilience is the result of a dynamic set of interactions between a person's adverse experiences and his or her protective factors. Adverse child experience. Now, Gianna, I would conclude, has had a traumatic childhood experience, most particularly because of the way in which she lost her father. But the core protective factors that can surround this and many other children, and really many other adults, is that we develop close relationships with competent caregivers and other caring adults that are safe and stable, that her mother or mothers, parents have resilience themselves, that caregivers in general have knowledge and application of positive parenting skills, identifying and cultivating a sense of purpose through faith or culture or identity or any combination of the three. Individual developmental competencies, that is problem-solving skills and self-regulation, agency, self-agency. A child's social and emotional health can be a core protective factor. Social connections, socioeconomic advantages, and concrete support for parents and families. And of course, communities and social systems that support health and development and nurture human capital. So then we conclude that an increase in the protective factors, parental resilience, social connections, concrete help in times of need, parental knowledge of a child's needs and developmental needs, particularly social and emotional competence, though we have these life instances, life supplies many of us with challenges to test the strength of these protective factors. The reality is, in Gianna Taylor and her experience, we've seen former NBA star Stephen Jackson, who was a dear friend of her father, take on the role of being this communal support. And we have this child early on, after this adverse experience, making the comment, "My daddy changed the world." The suggestion, of course, being that there is something in her life that can help her find resilience. Now, as I stop the share, I want to focus just a few seconds on this idea of a traditional communalism that helps us, helps all of us, not just the children, but all of us. I have looked over and over and over at the ways in which faith informs our way forward, even in the process of serious adversity. It was what our ancestors used. It is what we must use. But apart from that, I speak from a place of indigenous wealth when I say that I am because we are. And this womanist concept of traditional communalism, coupled with Ubuntu's obvious message, I believe is a way forward. It is the sort of framing of these really protective factors that I think can help us. And being even more specific, I like referring to this African, really just truth, that it takes a village. And more specifically, that when our protests think in terms of forward together and backwards never, we must always, always, always commit ourselves to bringing up the children, to bringing them forward. Lots of people have asked the question, Should children be apart? And I'll leave that to individual parents and their capacity to talk about and work through the developmental pieces. But my concern is about us as communal people embracing the children, so that in my tradition, when Christ asked the question, who is my mother, my brother, or my sister, our family increases. Thank you.
So powerful. Thank you so much, Dr. Smallwood. I love that you took the adverse childhood experience study, which a lot of people know about, but made it more immediate. When we see the children who have, the children of Jacob Blake, the children of George Floyd, there's a way in which we can talk about trauma, and we can talk about the science around resilience and things like that. And we can talk about it somewhat in the material, but we'll put it in the past. But what you have done is made sure that we see it right here and right now. And because you're talking about the children, you're also helping us to think about, what does this mean for the future, right? This impact in this moment. And then you beautifully showcased what this little girl said, that my daddy changed the world, right? And so what is the future looking like for her as she carries this grief? But at the same time, there's something in there, right, that you help us see related to resilience. That doesn't mean her road is going to be easy, but there's, I think that that statement that you helped us focus on from her helped us see how resilience happens in the middle, right? And that was a big piece for takeaway from last week's or the conversation earlier in the month, that resilience happens on the go. It's not something that we look up and we did it, or it's somewhere to go to. It happens, it builds along the way. So thank you so much for helping us to really get clear about the materiality of what's happening. And now we want to move over to Reverend Vahisha Hassan. And so when we think about the traditional communalism that Dr. Smallwood brought forward and helped us to think about, you laid an amazing groundwork for understanding this is a now and a next thing. And part of what happens, what we recognize also, is that there are probably people in the movement now who had unfortunate stories, right? Like Jacob Blake's children and like George Floyd's children, who are now adults, who are living that resilience and at the same time are working through the trauma of those experiences while doing good, powerful, important work. The reality is now, how do we reckon with forward movement and also healthy relationships that acknowledge the intensity that trauma brings to relationships? And so for that, we want to make a curve now to take a look at what does it mean to deal with communal spaces that are built around accountability and healthy relationships, and when things go awry, and so for that, we'll take a look at what Reverend Vahisha Hassan has to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Compton, Dr. Wilson, for having all of us on today. Thank you, Reverend Gorski and Reverend Smallwood, for just being dope and brilliant, and happy to share this space with all of you. Dr. Smallwood does this to me all the time, okay? Like, I just be sitting here minding my own Black business, and all of a sudden my heart is just jumping out of my body because of the way that she brings concepts to a poignant place, right? And so, I just had to like breathe a little bit. But what it brought up for me too was that connectivity that you're talking about, Dr. Compton, and my favorite song of all time, even though I am totally, one of the lead organizers for the Beehive. But my favorite song of all time is The Greatest Love of All by Whitney Houston. And we know the Whitney Houston version, I should say. And we know that begins with, I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all of the beauty that they possess inside, give them a sense of pride to make it easier. But then it connects to us. Let the children's laughter remind us how we used to be. And so what does happen, Dr. Smallwood, when it's not laughter, but it's tears, when it's pain, when it's loss? What are we reminding ourselves of, right? And how do we infuse, re-infuse, and continue to have laughter and joy in these deep places of void and pain. And that's a lot. And it does get into then what if these children are our future, then now we are the children, and there will be children to come, right? And so we bring all of that into these movement spaces. All of that comes in, those adverse childhood experiences, the joyful childhood experiences, all of that happens. So what do we do when we got these children who are the future, that the future is today? And conflict is happening. Boundaries need to be looked at. Trust is a factor. What do we do, right? So I was very tempted to use the exact same 3 frameworks from our last time together, which was learn your landscape, learn yourself, and learn your people, because it still applies. But preacher, I'll give you 3 new points in a different poem, okay? So, so I'm gonna start with I still am gonna do strategies and impact. So this is the strategy and this is the impact from the strategy. But the first one is, let's be honest. So let's be honest. That's a strategy. Why are you here in this particular specific movement space? Why are you here? Why did you say yes to the call? Why do you continue to say yes? And so I recognize for all of us that, of course, this can include freedom for our people, or there's a very specific passion area, a specific issue that we are passionate about. But also, when we're answering that question, what did you bring into this space? What children are you? What trauma did you bring? What adverse childhood experiences did you bring? What conditioning did you bring? What biases did you bring? What triggers did you bring? And then, what needs are being met or unmet here in this space? Because this is where we need to be honest, right? We humans, we like to get our needs met. Is that not real? We like to get our needs met. We're not toddlers, but we just are grown toddlers out here trying to get our needs met, right? So should these needs be met here? Let's be honest. Should we be seeking that these specific needs be met in this space? Is that part of our motivator? So much conflict and broken trust comes from unmet needs and unspoken, unexamined, and unacknowledged expectations. These are our beginning and foundational places of brokenness. So an honest exploration of these very valid motivators, your needs are valid, but an honest exploration of these valid motivators can be very revealing and places for healing. And for some of those times, facilitation of such an honest exploration could be really beneficial. And this should also be a consistent check-in, not just a response like during or post-conflict. So like this is a check-in you can do with yourself, and this is a check-in you can do with the people that you co-labor in liberation with. So that way you get that communal aspect that Dr. Smallwood is talking about, right? But we also have some individual reflection. So the impact of being honest is that then you can move in authentic ways, both for yourself and for others. That's the individual and the communal. This is the Ubuntu and the your own divine purposing. There's deep power in naming your needs to yourself and to others. There's deep power in knowing what you need and in others knowing what you need. In mental health spaces, we talk about support plans. Like, what's your plan in case of a crisis, in case of needed support? Identify the who and the how, and these like discussions and agreements happen before the conflict, before the crisis, right? That's why it's called a plan, not a response. So when these potential crises or conflicts, or there's just a heightened need of support, just normalize having such a plan in place individually and communally. And when you do that, this can establish trust. And in this way, with our being honest, you can trust and be trustworthy, because both are important. We will be quick to talk about how our trust has been broken, but much less quick to distinguish whether we are vessels of trust, that we are being trustful places for others. So as a container that both pours out and is poured into, is the trust flowing both ways? Internal conflict is what most often spills over and out into external conflict. So we see the external, but it's oftentimes an overflow of what is internally happening within us, right? So there are levels. There are levels to this healing work. So we got, let's be honest. Second, let's be intentional. So now that we know and we've reflected on what we need, why we chose this specific movement space that we in, what agreements are in place? So we're not just busting in like, okay, when's the next action? What are we doing? What we doing? What's going down? What do we believe? What do we share? What do we agree to? What agreements in place? What are our shared? What's our consent? Shared consent in these spaces. That's what these communal agreements are. Shared consent. How shall we function together? How shall we avoid dysfunction before the dysfunction shows up? How shall we handle conflict as part of those agreements? This is a proactive naming of shared ways to move, and this is invaluable. And then revisit it often. Revisit these agreements often. Have a process when agreements are not honored. So you just don't make the agreements, but also have within that shared consent. How do you consent to hold those agreements? How do you consent to factor when they are not honored? And then things feel like a choice, right? Is this the best choice? This is your check-in. Is this the best choice for you? This space, this movement space. Is this the best choice for others? It shouldn't always just be about you. Is this the best choice for us? Is this the best choice for you? And this is not the only space to do this work. It's like church. Listen, if you are deeply not being fed, deeply unhappy, don't like the music, the usher always looking at you wrong, whatever your deal is with church, right? It ain't the only church. And it's the same with movement space. The space that you're in may not be the only space where this happens. This goes back to the learning your landscape, finding your people, knowing your people. Find your lane, find your path. It doesn't have to be where you are. You have agency. That agency, you have a choice. Lean in when that is best for you and others. Step back when that is best for you and others. Communicate, 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 and then communicate that you communicated, and then communicate some more, okay? And how can this happen? It doesn't all have to be verbal, right? So this can be verbal, this can be written, this can be an email, it can be a picture, it can be a poem. Find your way, but get it out. Charles White said, express yourself. Dun, 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 dun. Express yourself. Ain't that what he said? Dun, 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 dun. He said, everything ain't everything if it ain't the thing you want. So express yourself, make sure that this is the thing that you want. You know, just like we can tell when someone is not pleased or excited about their role in the world or their job, right? It's very clear. So you don't want to be that person in movement space. Seek out resolution, reconciliation with folks in conflict. Seek out, right? That's an active seeking. Go after resolution and reconciliation. Seek out reasonably objective supports for that process. So I say reasonably objective because movement space is this big. Okay, it's this big. So we're all connected a lot of times in some kind of ways, but find a reasonably objective person that you can journey with to help support conflict management. And then the impact of this is that you then move in a strategic way, proactively and reactively. And then you're moving in your own agency because you've got these shared agreements, you've been able to consent. So you're moving in agency, not just obligation. And then you can have healthy boundaries. You're honoring yourself, honoring your community. And this also honors those who you fight for and those who you fight with. And that should be part of your ethic, right? So if we go back to that passion area you named, that subject area, or that deeply impacted, that person that's directly impacted by the work that you do, being honest, being intentional, also honors that fight and those people, those heartbeats who are on the line, those children that Dr. Smallwood even just talked about. Lastly, let's be accountable. So I'm gonna pause, I'm gonna ask this question and pause intentionally. Who are you accountable to? And I really want you to sit with that. You don't have to drop it in the chat, but you should be able to name, who are you accountable to? And it's gonna be concerning for me if this is difficult for you to answer. I can hear Reverend Asajifo Sekou ask, who is your base? Like, that's one of his favorite questions. Who is your base? Not just who you move, right? Because that's an aspect of organizing and movement work. Not just who you move, not just who you mobilize, but who are you accountable to? Who are you connected to that is impacted, directly impacted by your actions? I ain't talking about who you speak to or out about on the internet. Not who you think you speak for. Who are you in deep communal relation with that is both impacted by your actions and get this, has voice and access to you to express that impact? That is accountability, right? And then, do you listen? How do you listen? How is it measured whether you listened? Are you measuring it? Is someone else measuring it? Right? Do you have the agreements that we talked about? What is the process when these agreements are not honored? Do you control the process? If it's not honored, are the folks you accountable to controlling that? Desiree Lynn Attaway said, accountability is a radical form of love, y'all. It ain't punishment. Let me say that again. Accountability is a radical form of love, y'all. And she said, y'all, it ain't punishment. And that needs to be our orientation to accountability. And the impact of being accountable is moving in a principled way in season and out of season. So let's do that together, both before conflict arises, as conflict arises, and how we navigate conflict. Let's be honest, let's be intentional, and then let's be accountable. Thank you.
So beautiful. I had my microphone off. I was like, and so honesty, intentional, be honest, be intentional, be accountable. I kind of, as you were walking through your comments, I was thinking, okay, so there's this whole notion of people talk about in movement work, what is your self-interest? This takes it all the way to another level, right? So that people can be clear in speaking up for who they are and who they're not, right? And what you need and what you don't need. And also I really appreciate it lays a groundwork for setting some ground rules about how we're going to function when there is a problem, right? Because, you know, as we mentioned, as Dr. Smallwood pointed out, we bring stuff with us, right? We've been things, we've seen things, and we bring all of that with us, and it has a way of becoming very activated in moments of intention where we are pushing on behalf of ourselves and others. All that stuff comes in there with us. So I really appreciate the frame because I think that that is really what people are lacking in terms of harm in the process, even while trying to do good, that there's a possibility for harm. But you've given us some ways of helping people ground themselves in themselves first so that they can be aware of, right, what they need, what they don't need, so that they won't be just kind of unaware, right, of what they're bringing and how they're bringing and how they're being motivated to move in spaces with people that they like and love, right? That conflict happens in spaces with, even with people you like and love. Wonderful piece.
Absolutely. So I have a follow-up comment question, I think it is. I'm just wondering, could you say more about the challenges or capacities within a movement space to hold these types of conversations, or is there one example you would lift? Because you've laid out a framework, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how have you seen this lived out?
Mhm.
Yes.
So in there is conflict in all movement space, to be very frank and clear. And if you come back to the like your needs and your expectations, if you come into the movement space expecting this beautiful, consistent 24-hour kumbaya, easily disillusioned, and yeah. So I named this example to be clear that it's not the only example. But one time in Asheville, North Carolina, again, we were organizing around the murder of Jerry Ja Williams by the Asheville Police Department. And there was a lot of contention between different organizing groups, nonprofits, grassroots movement, and then, you know, everything from BLM to the people who were recently activated that were just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they would really kill a Black man in Asheville where we think that we are so progressive. And so it was entrenched. So, and there were historical things that had happened, and it got bad. I'm talking cuss each other out bad, like a protest on one side of the street, a protest on the other side of the street, and people was like, no, my people gonna be over here in protest, and we gonna be over here in protest. Some people getting in the street, some people not in the street, people in the street putting vulnerable people in danger, people not being in the street because of respectability. So you got like all of these different nuances happening, and it got bad. And so they brought in a mediator, Black woman who is just amazing in every way, and to bring these groups together to talk about this intentionally. But in this, I named this time because I've seen that done lots of places. But what was different in this space was Jerry's mom was there in the room. And let me be clear to say this should not have been a weight that she had to carry in this moment. But let me tell you what this Black woman did. She sat there and she watched the people yell at everybody, yelling, mad, or then, you know, calming, going through grounding exercises, trying to work through the things. And at some point she just stood up and was like, my son is dead and gone and never coming back, can't come back. And she laid out with deep fierceness and tears how long his body laid on the ground, how his arm was almost completely shot off of his body. And she brought it back to why everyone was supposed to be there. And she was like, so I don't know how to sit in this room while y'all argue over this, arguing over the body of my dead son. Ooh. And it was in this moment that everybody was like, oh. And it put into at least context and reflection that brought up why they were there, what they brought into that space. All of that's where kind of the things I laid out came from. It happened in that moment, and lots of healing was done. Not all of it totally lasted, but like for years, there was a different spirit and peace and consent way to journey together and to organize together. And again, it did actually last for years. And that's what it took, you know, that's what it took. And so, yeah, so there are organized ways that people come together and navigate this conflict, and typically by some type of mediator. But sometimes we also need to remember the voice and the, like I said, the directly impacted person and persons that are at stake when the conflict is happening. Like, is our internal thing, is our ego and our very valid places of concerns or needs larger than why we are there? And sometimes you have to infuse that in that space.
I want to say thank you and name the power of it, and the not only of the person directly impacted, but what would happen if out of our own why, our own motivation in the first place, that I entered the space, what you both have shared and what Reverend Gorski is going to bring, what if we then utilize our voices? What if we exercise agency in that moment, in the heat of the room, and we would be willing to be the voice to bring us back to who we say we are and why we're here? Thank you. That's powerful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking for the specific example.
Thank you so much. And thank you also, Dr. Wilson, for going further so we could get to bring it all the way out. And so what I love about having amazing panelists is that we get multiple strategies, right, on how to deal with one thing, right? And so what I love is that, and I can't say who exactly was in the room or anything about his mother, but that was a grassroots get it together strategy moment, right? Like this is grassroots. You had your mediator who came in, who she works in grassroots space, right? And I think that is critical, first of all, for persons of faith to develop a bit more respect, right, for grassroots capacity, instead of believing that the church has all of the answers. And at the same time, there is a way in which the church is doing some work to be able to catch up or run alongside be a parallel process and strategy for grassroots work. And so for that, I want to turn us over to Reverend Barbara Gorski to say a little bit more about the companionship program that is very much circulating in faith communities so that faith communities can get involved, right, in meaningful ways, because I think it's pretty important that there are grassroots strategies that are happening in the streets. And then there's sometimes that people in the streets need a space to just step back, and they want to be in churches, but churches have to be ready, right? And so Barbara, if you could say a little bit, Reverend Barbara, about the companionship model and what our faith has to say to maintaining and supporting relationships as we carry one another forward in movement building.
Sure. I'm so honored to be here today. And after I've heard Dr. Smallwood speak and Reverend Hansen and you, Dr. Crumpson, and I know Dr. Wilson, Barbara Wilson, I'm really in awe because it's amazing about how we all do have a different perspective and how we all really work together in having this kind of movement space that can help us be motivated to move into action. So I'm going to start share my screen here. Let me see. Whoops, here it is. I'm going to just get that up there. So I want to just review quickly what I talked about last time when I talked about the companionship workshop, and movement is what it really is. What the movement is about is it's about learning to really be present to one another in a way that we can provide a safe space and allow for people that have ACEs. Thank you for reminding me of that and what all that means. People that have been wounded in all the different ways that life wounds us can have connection with people that are authentic and mutual relationships that I believe can help bring healing. I'm really so excited about the work that I've been doing with Barbara Wilson and the Reverend David Thornton, but we've been working with the Chicago Presbytery to actually move and send this companionship training out into the different churches. But I want you to know I see it being just one piece, right? One piece of a huge problem that we've already heard so eloquently expressed, oh my gosh, about the personal work we have to do, the intellectual work of understanding ACEs. It's very complex, but I believe this model is something that is a beginning model. So I just want to keep going to the next slide. Whoops, let me figure out how to do that. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the general model of companionship. And I love how it starts with that big distress. Do you see that? That kind of fits in with what Reverend Hansen was talking about of self-awareness. Knowing yourself and knowing what you are experiencing on the inside that then becomes a reflection of you in the outside world. The beginning of this whole model is learning to discover who your neighbor is, right? And I was just thinking about this. I don't know if any of you have ever read the book Pastrix, The Cranky Beautiful Faith of a Saint and a Sinner by Nadia Blotz Weber. But she told this story that I think is so appropriate for us. She started a church that was very attractive to people that were in the margins, right? People that were homeless would come to her worship service. People that maybe didn't have good clothes, maybe they came to church because they were hoping to get some food. They were people that really get left out sometimes of our church communities, right? Because they don't have that perfect outfit. They don't know the liturgy to follow it perfectly on Sunday morning, right? You're with me on that. What she did is, in her book, I'm not going to quote it exactly, but this one part just really moved me. She said all of a sudden some rather middle class and upper class people started coming to her church because her church became very popular for all these people that are in the margins. And she became kind of distressed about that. Like, what are you doing here? You know, this is a church for sinners, people that are, you know, that don't fit in and they need to come here. And I want to tell you that in the same way, if we just flip it, so often we're the same way. We think we're open, we think we're welcoming, but then if somebody comes in who's really different, who maybe has a lot of aces, it's hard for us to feel like we can just have them be one of us. And I think this model of companionship is a way to help us break down some of our internal barriers and I think help us to welcome everybody in a way that the relationships we have then can help us all heal, even some of us who don't think we need healing. So in the model of companionship, if you'll remember before, the scripture model is the Good Samaritan. It talks about the story of the person who's traveling and gets robbed and injured, and one person just walks by, one person kind of looks and is just too busy to take attention, and another person comes and literally helps this person. I think that scripture is a good foundation for how this model of companionship works. As we discover who our neighbor is, which is really, for us in the church, is whoever comes into our door, really. But then it's beyond that, who's outside our church doors. When we start to see people who have aces, when we start to realize the pain and suffering that so many of our people experience in life, we should be distressed. In a way, I'm going to go back to Reverend Hansen's question, who are you accountable to? If you're accountable to this faith, to this God that moves our hearts and our lives, then we should be distressed. We should be distressed a lot with what's happening around us. And so being distressed is something then that helps us to move, right? It helps us to move into action. So the action steps are first becoming aware. You know, can we become aware of people that need some assistance, that really aren't feeling like they belong? And I think that takes a really, really sensitive self-awareness of observations, of connecting with those people who you don't know and you think, maybe there's somebody who I need to connect with. So then you see these people come in, or a person come in who seems different, maybe isn't part of your regular congregation. And then you decide that you're going to stop and introduce yourself. You're going to begin a relationship with them. So the action is beginning to have a relationship with them. However you can express your care for them, you stop, right? You notice them. You pay attention to them. And then as you get to know them more, you realize they might have other needs that you can't provide as a friend. And you partner with other professional resources that can help take care of those needs. An easy example could be my little church. It's a very little church that's powerful. We have a food pantry. So we often have people that come in who are just hungry and we say, yeah, come to our food pantry. I keep trying to tell everybody I know we have a food pantry, send people here if they're hungry, if they need food. Things like that can really help a person. But then the final piece of this companionship model is that we maintain connections with people, right? So we don't just go up to somebody in need and we say, hey, I can help you. I've got my act together and I can really help you. So here, take my food and you're goodbye. It's about maintaining connections with people in a long-term basis, not just a day, not just a week, but months and months and months, staying connected. That's like the very basis of the companionship model. So along with ACEs, which is so important, and I think there's so much new literature coming out on that right now that's so important. There's other definitions of concerns that bring people to places where they don't fit in and they feel kind of in the margins of life. Trauma, which goes with ACEs, mental illness can be part of that. Substance use disorder, children's mental and behavioral health, insecure housing or threat of joblessness, and issues of aging are all areas of concern that this model of companionship is to address. So here's kind of the steps of action, which I think are good to remember. We can choose to pass by, right? Go back to the Good Samaritan story. We can choose to pass by. We can choose to just kind of observe, or we can choose to approach and get involved, begin a relationship. So I think back to thinking about Reverend Hansen and what she talked about is that voice inside of us. Where are we? Where are we? Are we willing to choose again and again and again to stop and get engaged and approach and have them be part of our life, right? You're shaking your head, right? We can do that, but we need to do that over and over again, right? Over and over again. We need to choose that we're going to get involved. And then the other thing that I think is so important for us to realize is that this companionship process is a process. You know, I think we're so impatient. We're impatient people in general. We want to make a change and we want it to happen now. We want to do something really good for somebody and we're done. I'll give you this and you're done now, you're fine. But you know, we are not built that way. We are complex people. We have all these experiences. We have all these negative experiences. We have all these wounded experiences, and it's a process. And so I think it's important to slow down. Know that whatever we do is going to be not just one day, but years of connecting with people. It begins with awareness, begins then and moves us to connection. Then it moves to partnership where we work together, and then mutuality. So today we're particularly supposed to talk about some things we can do. And so I thought we would talk about that a little bit, because it's kind of like, well, what do we do once we stop? Once we decide, oh yeah, I should be involved here. I'm gonna be a good companion to somebody. How can this work? How are the steps? What are the steps involved with this? Well, it begins with hospitality. And you know, hospitality is something our churches do really well, right? Right? Shake your head, presenters. Right? Not so good. Well, Presbyterians are known for their casserole dishes, is what I've heard. We definitely like to eat together, but hospitality is not always so easy to do. It's like, what do people really need? How do you open the door to being present to them? People that struggle with ACEs, hospitality might look different for them than somebody who is a new neighbor or somebody who's moving in, who's new to the church and just wants to have just a connection. Hospitality is opening your home if you can. It's making sure that you call, maybe send letters, greet one another over and over again, of recognizing that that person is there. And that person's important. No matter what they bring with them, they have value. And then neighboring is like being a good neighbor. And we've been talking about that, I think, in our whole discussions that have gone before is being a good neighbor means that we step out of our comfort zone to do what needs to be done to help another. Being a good neighbor might mean that we have to sacrifice sometimes. We might have to give out of our own abundance to somebody who has less. Another action is being side by side. And this is really important. I think so often we would like to lead people, right? Like, I know what your problem is, and I have the answer for you. You just follow me, and I'll lead the way. But that is not what's true to this model of companionship, right? In companionship, we want to be side by side. We want to be standing equal with people of need, and we can both look out and see the same thing from the same place. I don't know any more than this person standing next to me what they need. They don't know any more than I know what are some opportunities for them. It's like we stand side by side and we discover together what are some ways we can develop this relationship and we can become mutually committed and connected to one another. And then the fourth action is listening. And I know, Dr. Hansen, you talked about this. I can't emphasize enough how important listening is. I've got some tips for you for good listening. One is that it's a gift to simply listen. I can't tell you enough how important it is to just listen. Not listen with your brain going crazy, thinking about what you have to say, just sitting there listening to another person. And then what do you think? What do I need to listen for? You need to listen for themes and feelings, right? What are they telling you? You need to listen to yourself. What are you saying to yourself as you hear them talk about their themes and their feelings? And then we have to be very gentle, very careful with how we respond to what a person says. Because sometimes we'd like to think we know what that's all about for them. But boy, we sure don't. Of anything we've learned from all these presentations, we really have to learn to know each other better, that we can't assume we know another person. We need to listen again and again and again over time, not only if it's a church setting, but if it's over coffee, if it's sitting on a park bench, if it's driving in the car together, we have to listen over and over again. And we need to listen for words of hope and for words of love. And then, this is what I really like a lot. We have to be open to hearing a person's soul story. Have you ever heard about that, a soul story? You know, we all have a soul story. Something very deep within us that tells us who we are. It's a story that's got to be shared because it's critical to understanding each other in our walk together. And then accompaniment. We already know what that means. That means we don't just give them something, like I said. We don't just stand side by side. We don't become just their neighbor, but we go with them into the future, walk with them into tomorrow, whatever that looks like. And then I want to just end with a little bit about how do we know if our actions are working, right? We always want to know, are we doing any good? Or is this just like doing nothing, right? There are some markers of mutuality that help us to know if our work is on target. Is there a deepening honesty and authenticity? Both ways now, both ways. Is there growing individual responsibility? Is that person you're partner with starting to feel some more internal strength, where they can start making some decisions and have some ideas about choices for them? Is there reciprocity? Are we sharing kind of our general humanity with each other? Is there trust? Is there expanding circle of care? Have they found more people that can help? Not just me, maybe as a companion, but others too. And then, is there a network of family, friends, and community connections that can all build together to have this mutuality that can lead toward healing? So in the companionship training, they end with this benediction that I thought I would read. And I'll just let you take it in as I say the words. Hear these words. I am grateful for all who have been present in my life with tenderness, understanding, hope, and support. May I, in turn, share healing, recovery, and well-being with my neighbor. May our companionship together be guided by sensitivity and compassion, honoring the dignity in each one of us. Amen. So this is the conclusion of my presentation.
Well, I want to say thank you so much, Reverend Barbara, for sharing out of the abundance, not only of the content, but of heart and spirit. And I have a question, follow-up question for you. At the end, the sharing of the markers of mutuality are important. And I want to go back sort of to the beginning of what you shared. And the question is this: since people in faith communities also have ACEs, we have measures of diversity, and since, these are my comments, and since we as the church, in the church, are human beings with frailties just like anybody else who's our neighbor, I'm wondering your thoughts about how the church's unwillingness, my word, to engage our own stuff might be hindering our capacity to accompany and walk with and companion. Your thoughts?
Amen. So what I mean by that is, you're right on target with that. I think very much our own woundedness prevents us from engaging authentically with other people because we're not real with ourselves. And I think that talks about, Reverend Hansen, what you talked about, being authentic yourself and knowing yourself. I think that piece is built into this companionship model, though it's not directly. I think a person who's going to start being a companion, who's going to learn how to be present to another person, has to first know themselves. And I hope and pray that if a person isn't, that this process will make them aware that they need to do some work on their own. And you know what, just maybe the person they're companioning with might be the person that's going to help them with their own woundedness. Wouldn't that be amazing? If in our own wounds, we really become wound healers for each other. I think that is very possible.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback, because if engaged in a way with commitment, the companionship model encourages persons to, again, what we've already said, take action out of our own core values and principles, our own humanness, and engage another person. And so in that way, we can companion one another. And that's a way to build the core protective factors that Dr. Smallwood talked about, to build resilience, to mitigate trauma, but only if we are attending to ourselves. So thanks for engaging that question. Stephanie?
Yes, this has been so good. We want to invite those who are joining us. We've got a couple of comments that have come in into the chat box. We encourage you all to continue to make comments and offer questions. My question to you, actually, to the entire panel, because I think I want to get real concrete here. So we're talking about ACEs, and we're talking about ACEs and their impact and how they show up in children and who children become adults. And then we move into this work, right? Same as ACEs show up in people who are raised in churches and who are walking in the companionship model. My question, because I'm kind of brimming with this. My question is, how do we address moments when the ACE has a discrete or clear racial component or gendered component, right? Or ability or sexuality or ethnicity, you know, all of those pieces, because there's a way in which, especially because we're talking about strategies for movement building, and there are moments when allyship is a part of movement work, right? And allyship occurs differently along different lines depending upon what the issue is. And then there's the intersectionality of it all, right? And so my question is, for the two models and the reality of ACEs themselves, how do we, as we think about moving into awareness and engagement around ACEs, awareness around self-interest, awareness around companionship, as we're thinking about these are options for us to do this work, can you all talk a bit about how those pieces I named, race, class, gender, sexuality, ability, all of those, right? How that gets in the mix, right? Because an ACE is an ACE. It's an experience that was what it was, but the experience happened to a particular person, a particular body that has been labeled any one of those things that I just identified. Can you guys talk a bit about how those very real social factors, which often are the reasons why people are in movement work, right, on behalf of, you know, addressing an ill or some sort of an inequity related to those social factors. Can you all talk about the complexity of dealing with not just kind of jumping over like, oh, we all had a traumatic experience, but the importance of intersectional awareness as we're moving into these different, this level of awareness, and also these two different strategies for maintaining and sustaining movement work. And feel free, whoever wants to take a shot at it.
You know, I'm going to just start by saying one of the real crises of our church is that we don't often have a lot of diversity. Right there. I'm just going to put it out there. We don't have a lot of diversity. And so it becomes problematic when we try to reach out to a population that we have very little experience working with, right? I don't know. I'm sure my other colleagues might have more to add to that.
Well, I'm going to jump in until our other two colleagues are ready to offer. What I would say is, it seems to me that this thing of agreements, and that may not be the right term, Reverend Venetia, but you know, if we are ascribing to Ubuntu, you know, that I am because we say all of these things and we're all part of the human family. So the inattention that or lack of attention that we give to the need to how are we gonna be together? Whatever the social issue or concern we're addressing, that thing of what is the care and accountability that we, the collective, have come together. And that's a good starting place, it seems, right? And the fact that I've not worked much with a particular other identified group, actually that might evoke whatever it evokes in me, but that's not, and not that you said this, Reverend Barbara Gorski, it's not an excuse for my inaction. If I am called to be a human being that is aware and that is doing my inner work and also seeking to live in community with others, well, I have a responsibility to go after some things. So I want to stop there. I think Reverend Venetia and Dr. Theresa might be ready now to offer.
And I do want to say, just out of respect, it's Reverend Vahisha Hassan.
Forgive me, Reverend Fahisha. I got it.
Thank you. It's a lot of name, and I also love it. And so I appreciate the intentionality in attempting to pronounce it correctly. And I can tell if you're related to me, because if you're in my family, they say Vaisha. So if somebody says Vaisha, I know there's DNA involved, and I just turn around and do whatever they tell me to do. So, but thank y'all. I was gonna say for the ACEs piece, yes to the naming, right? Yes to the agreements. Part of that naming, Reverend Gorski, is what spaces we're comfortable and used to sharing and not sharing. And then back to the being honest. Same things. Are you honestly assessing what you bring in? So even, it's not enough to share space. But if you're not honest about what you're bringing to that space, what biases you're bringing to that space. So I'll just be frank. So whenever I do like a implicit bias training or anti-racism training, and it's hard for folks across spectrums of melanin to be frank about what they feel and the stereotypes and biases and the things that we have, I was like, listen, y'all, I'm not scared of Black men walking down the street. I'm scared of white men, because according to my TV, that's all the serial killers, right? And the mass shooters and the whatevers. I was like, so I have to work and unlearn and learn how to be safe in my body, how to feel safe in my Black woman bodysuit, while not making every white man a serial killer, right? That's gonna put me in the basement in a long dress and right? Like I'm gonna have to, listen, this is real, that's what I'm saying. So the same way people clutch in their purses, if a Black man get on the elevator, you need to be real about what your things are. So let's be honest. And so typically if I do this in some shared spaces, racial spaces, they're like, oh, it never occurred to me that you would be afraid of white men. I was like, yeah. Because the same way that somehow Black male bodies have been made to be the face of violence in America, but when it comes to mass shootings, when it comes to actual death tolls, when it comes to a lot of these things, it's white men. So that is my place of fear and concern around safety, right? And I have to navigate that in a well way to still journey with white men for liberation. And that's the deal. That's the work. So how do you be honest in your own body to navigate these intersections of ACEs? And then how are you accountable? If I'm never, to your point, if I'm never in space with white men, or if I'm never in space with men or women, non-binaries of all, how the way we show up in the world, my accountability also will just look just like me. And then I don't grow from there. And so these are the questions, and you get to choose, right? Back to the agency, the space that you work in and the space that you are best used and pour into. But that examination should happen for sure. And last thing for the ACEs, so back to, I'll just tell y'all all my business, right? So my mom, my single parent, Black mom who taught me what it was to be safe in the world. Part of my white men fear came from, what was it? Stranger danger. I grew up in the stranger danger time and the missing children, what's the dude that was in the cape, in the long jacket on the, right? I grew up in that kind of TV era. And she would say, if a cargo van, the passenger vans were the ones with the sliding doors on the side, don't park near those, don't walk near those. If one of those pull up, immediately go backwards, because they can't get you as quick if you go backwards than forwards. Like, this is the type of equipping that I was given to be a Black girl in the world. And the face of danger for me was white men. So it's important that we name some of those things, look at our own childhood experiences, and really, really model that being honest, that being accountable, and transparent, and doing that work. It doesn't change the reality of the dangers of our world, but we can change our perspectives of how we journey with other heartbeats for the liberation that should be available for everyone.
I don't have much to add to that, but I am really drawn to the question from an image. The first time I saw the postcard of people standing by a lynched body with a child around the neck of the father, apparently. I have often wondered, and one of the reasons I'm driven to always, start with the children is that I understand very, very clearly that until we have something that grounds us in a moral space, that brings us to our senses, so to speak, that really causes us to look beyond ourselves and into something that requires of us some kind of calculation about the future, unless we can find that red thread, so to speak. And when I look at that image, I know that lots of what we've experienced, generationally, is because people were not aware. They just did not have a consciousness to take somebody's child who's working in your field and sell them. To take somebody's child and put them in a cage today. And so, I am very much aware that epigenetics causes change in people that even the intersectional analysis cannot necessarily evaluate. But one of the things that I know, even someone who is severely mentally ill, they have a core about little ones, about, what that might do. And if there's anything that can ground us, anything that can bring us to this place of solidarity. There's lots of people talk about truth and reconciliation. I can't reconcile what I never had. But what I can do is come to grips with the fact that we are responsible, as adults particularly, to get it together, to find ways for the future generations. That's my thought.
I think what's so powerful about what we've heard in response to the question and just the conversation itself is the importance of recognizing that the experiences that we have happen in bodies, and the responses that we are seeking to create through strategies that we've talked about today also happen through bodies, right? Our memories are embodied. Right. And so this is kind of actually one of the ways this conversation has brought up for me the importance of thinking about taking seriously what the field of somatics has to teach us, right? About how we live in these bodies, how memories are stored in our bodies. You gave a nod to it, Dr. Smallwood, just now when you mentioned epigenetics, right? That there are things that we carry with us and that are happening on the cellular level, which really is what ACEs are about. Adverse childhood experiences is really a scientific examination of what happens to the physical body and the brain and brain chemistry and physiology, what happens to the body in response to a traumatic event. And what this has helped me kind of grapple with in this portion of the conversation is to grapple with what is the impact of on the body, not just the brain, cognition and story and narrative, but what is the impact on the body of racism, classism, sexism, ableism, all right, ethnocentrism, heteronormativity, homophobia, all of these EAs, right? That there's a physical experience, right, of those forceful moments, and that it takes solidarity and it takes strategy, but it also takes some physical healing, right, of those parts of our bodies that store those memories in order to be able to carry forth healthier selves, or at least to commit to an ongoing healing process that makes the strategies that you all have named possible. because I wonder if when we watch, let me just say for myself, one of the most frustrating things in the world for me is that if I am working on something or I'm working with someone on something and we say, this is what I believe and this is what I'm committed to. And then the behavior is completely contrary and it feels very different from the espoused commitments, right? And I name myself in that too. So so I recognize we could be thinking one thing, but behaving completely differently. And part of it is around awareness, cognitive awareness of the stories we're carrying, cognitive awareness of the histories we've been in. But I think another part of it is that there is also an embodied experience that repeats itself affectively and is a part of the encounters to which I think you all are calling us to pay attention.
One quick thing, Stephanie,
yeah.
one quick thing. I want to say yes, agreed. And what I heard underneath all of that, what you just recapped, Stephanie, is even before strategies, I heard this thing of, and I've lost your word, Dr. Smallwood, this thing of the ethic, the thing that's underneath it, the core, the core of who we are and what we believe about that's underneath it all. And that's why strategies often don't work. This was powerful. Go ahead, Stephanie.
I think they animate, the ethic animates.
Yes.
Practices and the strategies, right? So you have a strategy, but like there's an animation going on in there. There's some elements that have made their way alive, right? And this is the work to which we're called, the healing of wounds. And also while we're trying to help somebody else heal their wounds, we find out, oh, this is a collaborative thing. We're both healing our wounds together, which I think is what sits very much at the heart of the companionship model.
I wanted to add one thing to the documentation of it, because you talked about the church. I think right after I talked about, I did want to honor that the Black woman who was the mediator in that space in Asheville was Reverend Tammy Forte Logan.
Nice.
So this was a faith body that did this work and that was in deep enough, and hear this, church, right? That was in deep enough relationship with in community, in movement spaces, in faith spaces, in bodies that had a spectrum of the way faith shows up or is expressed, and was a trusted body in that space. And the meeting didn't happen at a church, right? But it was a faith body that did that work. So what can it look like for faith bodies to be in deep enough relationship that when conflict does come up, one, we not the cause of it. One, and then two, that when we're called on, we can do this in a well way. And we know how to start a meeting without a prayer that only comes from our faith tradition, that we know how to walk into a space and honor or not even give a crap what someone's faith or otherwise orientation is. And what can that look like? Beloved community got the love in there, right? And so this is also how the church needs to learn how to show up.
Thank you for tell me your name again.
It's Reverend Tammy Forte Logan. I'll put it in the chat too. It's TAMIFORTE.
Thank you for bringing her clearly into the conversation, helping us to see that she's not living in the divide, but rather in the gap, moving back and forth. Reverend Barbara, it looked like you were going to say something, Reverend Gorski.
Yes, I wanted to just comment on something you said, Dr. Crumpton. When you said that sometimes a person's behavior is different than what they think, it just triggered something in me. And I think the faith community has a place where we have strong enough relationship, be a mirror for each other and question each other when our behavior is not authentic to what we say we believe. And I think sometimes we, don't have the courage to do that with one another. And we could help each other grow by being more honest with each other. So I just wanted to share that.
I appreciate that, the whole notion of lifting up mirrors and having the courage to stand there and hold the mirror while somebody beholds themselves and being willing to look when they show you yourself too. I like that idea of church. I like that image a lot. So we are just about at the end of our time. I want to give our panelists the last word. Before we go there, I do want to remind, first off, I want to thank our faithful community that continues to be present and support us and engage our panelists. We really appreciate you all for joining us week after week, month after month. We've been going strong since April, and you all have been interested and have taken your time to be here. And we really appreciate you very much. As a reminder, this is the last of our September session. We have 2 remaining sessions in the Trauma Symposium. For October, we will be looking at trauma and mass incarceration. So we have 2 sessions. They will be our final sessions for the Trauma Symposium. We hope that you will join us. Reverend Barbara, Reverend Barbara Wilson, do you have anything to add before we give our panelists the last word?
No, please, last word to the panelists.
I'll start. I just want to say we have much work to do. And in particular, people with white skin have a lot of work to do. And we have to learn to listen. We have to learn to see with different eyes. And we have to learn to have a voice that can amplify other voices. And we just have a lot to do, and I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up because I believe our faith, grounded in Christ, gives us the strength to keep moving forward, even when the change seems not existent or small. Thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you for being with us.
I'm really enriched by this forum, this platform, and I think the 2 of you are real visionaries. I really appreciate that we have gotten into the weeds on ACEs. For me, it is really being grounded enough to understand that if you don't show backup at home after you go to the movement space, your children will suffer. Right? So it's important for us to figure out these protective factors that can do the Kenny Rogers in our life. Know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. Because ultimately, it is the message of Sister Sledge that will keep us in the struggle. We are family.
Y'all know I ain't about to come back behind that and say nothing but we are family. Boom, 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 boom. I got all my people with me. Be inclusive. We are family. Boom, 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 boom. I got all my people with me. Hey, hey, hey. That's my benediction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will see everybody in October. Mass incarceration. Please take to heart what you've seen and heard. Look for, if you're interested in reviewing the recording, it will be available at the Chicago Presbytery, the Presbytery of Chicago and McCormick Theological Seminary websites. Take care, be well, see you in October.